the long-term trend, can be shown either by a straight line or can either be shown by an upward moving line. But traditionally in the diagram, you will see there is a straight line, and above and below the straight line, you will have a graph. Okay. Now in this diagram, you can see few things, or you can see some identifications. You can see that this blue line, when it is moving upward, it is moving upward to a point which is known as peak. So the economic activities are increasing, moving in the upward direction, and they're reaching a peak. After reaching a peak, there is a downfall, or there is a downward movement. But this downward movement is still above the trend line. Okay, so this is your trend line. So after peak, when the economic activities are slowing down or there is a downfall, so this is contraction. This contraction is also known as recession. Okay, so when the economic activities are contracting, initially the GDP was going up, now the GDP is going down. And you all understand that since 2020, and actually for the Indian economy since 2017, the GDP growth was slow, or there was a contraction in the economy. There was a slowdown in the economy. There are a lot many terms which we can use. And if that slowdown or if that contraction continues for a longer time period, then you call it recession. Okay, but recession is different from depression, as you can see in the diagram. Depression is a phase where the economy is moving below the trend. Okay, recession is a time period when the economy is still above the trend line, but there is a contraction. Now, this contraction, if it deepens, then it becomes depression. And this was the stage depression in 1920s. Okay, basically 1926 to 1929. So that was a depression time period. Every contraction is not depression. Okay, now, but when the economy is contracting, there is again a minimum point, or there is again a limit of this contraction. And this contraction point, this point is known as trough, the slowing down point. After this point, the economy will not go down further, but there will be an upward movement. Gradually, there will be an upward movement, and you can see that this is the recovery, where the economy is reviving. Maybe currently, as you see in the you understand in the media through the articles and through the news reports, that there is a recovery in the economy. Expenditure is increasing gradually, employment is rising gradually. And then when the economy, after recovery, there is a stage where the economy even crosses the trend line, now surpasses the trend line, moves above the trend line. So that will be expansion. So you can identify that there can be 4 phases in the business cycle, or there can be certain phases which we can talk about in the business cycle. Expansion, second, prosperity, boom. Okay. Third is contraction. Fourth can be depression. Fifth can be recovery. or it can be revival. And then sixth, again, expansion. And this will keep on taking place. After expansion, there will be a prosperity, there can be a boom. Boom is the upward point or the uppermost point of the business cycle. So therefore, business cycle is the upward and downward movement of economic activities around the trend value. Anything you want to ask, anything you want to say?
Yes, ma'am. Please explain, ma'am, trend line. What is the basis of taking trend line, ma'am? How to determine whether it is trend line or not?
Trend line is very simple. Like, let me try to show you. Suppose you, I hope you are able to see the Excel sheet.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, whatever you see here, these are the graphs which are related to the GDP growth rate of certain countries. And which are the countries which are here? These are the South Asian countries, say Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, Nepal. Now, these are the GDP growth rates on the year basis. Okay, one means it is 1991 and 30 is 2018 or 19. So over the year, you can see that, like say, suppose, let us take only one graph so that you can understand better. Now, is it okay? This is the GDP movement of India. Okay, this is the GDP growth rate. How the GDP has been increasing over the time period. So you can see that in some points, the GDP line, sometimes it is moving up, sometimes it is moving down, like that. Now, what I do is I try to find out the average value. Okay, so can you see this black line?
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
This
ma'am.
is a straight line, right? So this is a straight line means what you have done, there are GDP growth rate values. Like this is India, okay? This is India. So what you have done, you have taken the average of all the years. Like you have added these values and divided it by the number of years. That's how you take out the mean, okay? You understand that how do you calculate mean? So when you calculate mean, you actually get the average value. So this is the plotting of the average value over the time period. So you can see that slightly there is a slowdown. As compared to 1991, you can see that the line is showing a downward trend. Okay. So now if you see, okay. Now I hope it is much better. Now this line is the trend line. This is the average value over the years. Okay. Now you can see that over and sometimes the GDP growth is above this trend line and sometimes it is below the trend line. Are you able to see this?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Now is it okay for everyone?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So this is business cycle, Right now, if you take any of the values of the economic variable for India and you plot this way, either you do it in Excel or either you can simply do it in your graph paper. You simply plot the values and then you will find that there is an average value over the time period. So the economic activities are moving above and below this average value, and that's how the business cycles takes place. Okay. Now you can always talk about that who gave this theory, who gave this idea that there will be business cycles. So there are many economists who have talked about business cycles. Okay, but the most important person who has defined business cycle and in the recent times, this is this. Okay, let us see this. So business cycles are a type of fluctuation found in the aggregate economic activities. Okay. Now you can see it here. Business cycles are fluctuations in aggregate economic activity, expansion, recession. And the sequence of this change is recurrent, but not periodic. Now, what it means is that economic activities keep on moving in upward and downward direction. There is a general tendency that economic activities will sometimes expand and sometimes will contract. But there is no definite time period that for how many quarters or for how many months or for how many years there will be expansion and for how many years there will be contraction. So this definition is coming from Arthur Burns and Wesley Mitchell. Okay, and this definition which they have given in 1946, this is still the workable definition or the adopted definition of business cycle. So there, this is the new or the latest way of defining business cycle, measuring business cycle. It is not only that how do you define business cycle, but for business cycle, yes.
Ma'am, your voice is fluctuating in between. Sometimes it's loud and sometimes very, very slow.
Okay.
That is okay, bro.
Okay, let me close everything and then maybe I will share the screen again so it will be better.
It's okay, ma'am.
It's okay. Sometimes because I have opened the Excel file and the other sheets, that's why maybe. Okay, so this Burns and Mitchell are the people who are defining business cycles in the current time period. And then on these lines, there are further research and work going on in the business cycle. But traditionally, if you talk about business cycle, traditionally, again, there are economists who have defined business cycles, and there are many. And you start with Joseph Schumpeter. Then there is Kitchen. Then Juggler. And then there is Kondratiev. These are four different economists who have defined business cycle in the olden times, in the olden days, in the previous time periods, right? From the 17th century, they are trying to identify that how the economic activities have moved. So these are the four different economists, and there are four different types of cycle which is known by these people. Okay. So they say that how long the economic activities will remain in a particular phase. But the agreed definition is the fluctuations or the movements in the economic activities above or below the trend line. That is business cycle. Okay, so there can be various phases of business cycle which we can discuss according to various economists. But generally, when we talk about business cycles, there are four phases, as I told you, phases of business cycle. So the first phase is expansion. We always start with an expansion. So when you say business cycle, there is another term which you can use, cyclical movements. Cyclical movements. So cyclical movements of economic activity is known as business cycle. So expansion, recession, depression, recovery, or prosperity, boom, contraction, depression, recovery, so there are two ways in which we can talk about phases of business cycle. You can talk about 4 phases of business cycle, or you can talk about 5 phases of business cycle, and there will be repetition. After recovery, again there will be expansion. After recovery, again there will be prosperity. Okay, so the cyclical movement will keep on taking place. The economic activities will always be moving like this. Is it okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Any question? Any questions so far?
Ma'am, tell something about contraction.
We'll discuss all these 4 phases when we are talking about theories. We have, I guess we have 3 theories to discuss. We have the Hartree theory of trade cycle, Hayek theory of trade cycle, Schumpeter theory of trade cycle. We're talking about these theories, and then we'll talk about that what is expansion, why expansion takes place, what is contraction, why contraction takes place, what are the factors which leads to any of these phases. But first, let us understand that how do you define business cycle. Okay.
Okay, ma'am.
There are some more terms which you will come across in different books when you are reading. So there can be time sequence. Time sequence means occurrence and periodicity. That means how longer a particular phase remains, or how shorter a particular phase is, or how many times a phase occurs for the economy. It is always not necessary that the economy moves step by step to all these phases. Maybe immediately after expansion, there can be depression without a recession, or there can be expansion, very small recession, and then immediately recovery. Or maybe for some economies, prosperity and boom will be much longer, and contraction and depression will be much slower. Like, say, if you talk about two countries, you take the example India and China. So India and China are the countries which have a longer time of expansion and prosperity and a shorter time of slowdown or recession. And on the other hand, you can talk about Western economies where you have a longer time of slowdown or recession and a shorter time of expansion. And it depends on the time also. Like, there was a time when the Industrial Revolution was taking place. So that was the time when economic activities were at a boom. Then the depression came and it remained for a longer time. Then over the time period, these sudden changes were continuously taking place in the economy. So there is a time sequence for business cycle. And then there are turning points in business cycle. So there are two turning points, peak and trough. Upward turning point and downward turning point. Okay, so this is the highest point. Peak is the highest point of trade cycle or business cycle or cyclical movements. Trough is the downward point or the maximum downward limit of business cycle. And every time there is a turn in the business cycle. These are also known as inflection point. Maybe you remember this term from your BA1 paper 3. The turning point on every curve, like you talk about inflection point on the production curve, if you remember that. This is the total product curve. And you find out the inflection point where the slope changes for the line. Inflection point is the point where the slope changes on the curve. So similarly, for business cycles also, there will be turning points where the phase changes or where the pattern of movement in economic activity itself changes. So now we will be talking about theories of business cycle. Theories of business cycles or trade cycles. So there are several theories and we will be talking about three. First is R.G. Hartree. And this is monetary theory of business cycle. Second, we will be talking about von Hayek. And this is investment theory of business cycle. And third, we will be talking about Joseph Schumpeter. And this is innovation theory of business cycle. Now, as you can see from the names, this is the reason why we are calling it monetary theory, because according to him, business cycles are a monetary phenomena. It is created because of the money supply in the economy, or monetary factors create business cycle. Investment theory says that it is the investment which creates business cycle. Innovation theory says it is the innovations which creates business cycle. So if innovations are increasing, there is an expansion. If the innovations are decreasing, there is a contraction. So we'll understand these theories, that how these theories explain business cycle, or why business cycles are created in the economy. What happens when business cycles takes place in the economy? There are several other theories which are the ancient theories. Okay. Ancient theories like sunspot theory, or psychological theory, or now these are all reasons that why there are fluctuations in economic activities. Okay. So because of the sun movement, there can be changes in economic activities. And you can, what is the reason behind this sunspot theory? Because as you understand that with the change in the weather, you see that the seasons in agriculture changes, or the agricultural activities are according to the seasons of agriculture, right? So there is a Rabi crop, there is a Kharif crop, and in between you have a time where you can have this Zayat crops. So that's how you identify the cycles in agricultural activities. Similarly, in industrial activities or in banking related activities, you have this lean period, or you have a boom period where economic activities slow down or where economic activities expand. Like you have summer and winter. So in some countries, winter is the time period when business takes place. In some countries, summer is the time period when business expands more. Okay, so there are different reasons that why business cycles can take place. Psychological theory is basically the expectations or the behavior of human beings. Okay, so in the previous time periods, you understand that in the ancient time period, people were behaving differently in different time periods. So sometimes people are more involved in economic activities, sometimes they are not. So according to their psychological changes or physiological changes, they were involved in economic activities, and that's how maybe people try to explain business cycles. So we are not going into much detail of all the traditional or the ancient history about business cycle, but we are talking about these three theories. Okay, there are several other theories which we are not talking about. There is a Keynesian theory of business cycle. Then there is a Calderian theory of business cycle, Samuelson theory of business cycle, Hicks theory of business cycle. But for us, it is only the three theories. So, yes, Rahul, you are right. You will be talking about several of the things, sometimes in geography, sometimes in political science. You will find the traces of the theories which we study in economics in your other papers too. Sometimes you get some better idea when you are talking about the history, the historical changes which are taking place. So economics is definitely related with historical changes. There is a history of economic development also. There is a history of economic theory also. Then political science, definitely you understand that when economics was in the initial phase, economics was a subset of political science. Similarly, geography. Geography is one of the most important component for economics, because without geography, economics does not exist, right? So you will have linkages with lot many things. And at any point of time, if any one of you want to share your idea, your understanding about any of these things, you are most welcome. So maybe tomorrow, Rahul, if you want to tell us something about the sunspot theory, it will be good for everyone to listen. Or any one of you, if you want to share anything, you can definitely do it. So I will stop here, and if you have any question, you can go ahead, or maybe we will meet tomorrow.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am.
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 What is the